In this video, I'm going to talk about controlling water and controlling fluidity in your paintings. And at the same time, I'm also going to talk about using the painting eraser because it's an essential tool that when your students are given this ability, they too can begin to control the flow and movement of color on their paper, and it will give them a confidence to build more complicated compositions in their work. So after you have soaked the paper, you will pass out the papers to your students, and they will receive a paper and it will be put on their board. It should not have excessive liquid on it. There should be a sense that the paper is damp but not soggy, that there may be a little bit of a shine on the paper, but it's not flowing water. So using the sponge, damp sponge, what they're going to do is their main objective is to make sure that the paper is very flat on the surface of the painting board, and at the same time they will then absorb any additional liquid or fluid water that is on the paper itself. So using slow, gentle strokes, you don't want it to take forever, but they're going to gently stroke the paper from one side to the other in order for the bubbles to get pushed out to the edge. If you find there's a bubble that is particularly stubborn, you might have to lift the paper up a little bit and lay it back down again, and then bring the sponge over it so that the bubble will know that he can depart. So then your paper should be feeling kind of dry. It has a little bit of dampness to it, but there is a real sense that there's no extra liquid, and it's ready to paint. You can put the sponge aside. The children should not have the sponge for paint. This sponge was used at times to pick up paint. You can see why it's colored, but it should remain fairly clean over the course of time because the children will not use this for paint repairs. Their work with paint repairs should only happen with a rag. Rags like these can be picked up at a paint store or Home Depot or Lowe's or someplace. What you're going to do is you're going to buy a bag of rags, and you're going to aim for all cotton rags. You can see this one is shaped like a circle. It's probably a remnant from some clothing manufacturer of some kind. And so I usually just fold it so that the children have a small piece that they can use while they're painting. Now, when they're controlling their water and using their brush to control this water, they will need a rag because this gives them an extra amount of ability to absorb water from their brush. And you can have lots of rags available because some children will use their rag so much that it will become a sodden rag, and so you would want to take a wet rag away from the child and give them a new dry one so that they have the tools that they need to do the job that they're going to do. Starting in the 3rd and 4th grade, the children will have a container of water. I use yogurt containers with my class. Some schools have jars. It doesn't really matter. You just want a clean container for the children to keep their water. And you're going to have your brushes. I have a 1-inch brush and I have a 1/2-inch brush. And then you'll have the paints. So I have my blue, and I have some yellow, and I have some red. Washing the brush, you can always allow the children to be gentle tap dancing when they're washing a brush. When they just splash it around like this, it doesn't get the paint pigment out from the inner layers of the bristles. So you may teach them to gently tap dance on the bottom of the jar. And it's not a pounding that they're pounding, but just a gentle pushing on the bottom. Some of the bristles may spray or splay out in different directions, but there's a real sense of allowing the pigment to come completely out of the brush. Once the children come out of the water, you also want them to become aware that the brush holds on to that water. They could actually do an experiment and squeeze out the brush into a different container to really know how much water the brush will hold. And when they know that, they will then awaken to the fact that if they don't wipe their brush on the side of the water jar before they go into the color, that they will actually bring more water into the paints and will make them less strong. And then their colors won't be so vibrant or exciting as the way we want them to be. So oftentimes wiping 3 or 4, 5 or 6 times on the side of the water jar before we go any further is really important. When the child is washing the brush in between colors, it's also the same. It's really important that the child spends the time removing as much of the color from the bristles of the brush that they can before they put it into the next color that they're going to use. If there's some concern that the color hasn't come out all the way, the child can use the rag and dab the brush on the rag. And if there's a remnant of color on the rag, then they know they need to go back for a swim and have another bath in there so that they can make sure that the bristles are really clean. Drying the brush on the side of the jar first and also dabbing it on the rag if they want to make it more dry. So I made a little splash here, so I'm going to just use a sponge to get this extra water. Okay, so now the same thing happens with the paint, is that the children will now have this fairly dry brush. It's not completely dry, there's still some water in there, but it's fairly dry. We want to dry it out a little bit more if you want. And the children can then dip their brush into the paints. I'm going to start with red, and I'm going to fill the brush full of paint. I'm going to hold it over here so you can see. So here you can see the brush is full of paint. And again, the children can test and actually wipe it. So here it's full of color. And if I wipe it on the jar lid, you can see how much paint is actually in that brush. It's quite a significant amount. And if you're bringing all of that paint onto the paper, it will cause a red flood. And sometimes we want that, and sometimes we don't want that. So we want to get better at picking and choosing when we want to have those floods. So here, we're going to wipe the brush on the side of the jar, 1, 2, 3, in the same way that we did on the side of the water. And therefore, there's much less paint in the brush. The child can then paint on the paper. I might need a little bit more. Get a little bit more here so you can see. I dip it in and I paint 1, 2, 3, a little bit more. And so I can have a nice strong red here. I'll make a nice area for us to work with. So as you can see, the paper is been soaked, so it's damp. When I put the color on, it doesn't cause any wrinkling or bumpling, and I can fill in a real nice form of color here. Now comes the painting eraser I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to turn this rectangle-like form into an oval form. What I'm going to do is I'm going to really wash out my brush, give it a good bath. I'm going to wipe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the brush is nice and dry, or dry that there's no excess water in it. The bristles are still fairly damp. And I'm going to then really put it on the rag so it's dry. Then I'm going to go into the paint and I'm going to just go over what I've painted. And Because the brush is dry, the bristles will soak up the color that's on the paper. Once I feel that the bristles are full, I will rinse it, get it clean again, and I will go over it again to erase, dry it on the rag, to erase what I put there. And I'll wash out the brush and dry it on the rag, and then I'm going to erase. Clean it again. This could be considered time consuming, but it's really a thoughtful, concerted effort to control the shape, not to use too much water, but just enough to soften the shape a little bit. Wash the brush, dry it off, and then with a dry brush I go over and I can pick up all that fluid. Where's my last corner here? Clean, dry brush, and I'm going to pick up the color. Use it, it's like a vacuum cleaner. It's going to clean up and pull up all of that excess. Water is going to push the color away because the water will lift the pigment and push it. So I can either continue to lift it by using my dry brush to take it away, or I could add a little bit more paint and I could fill it in and blend it in so then it matches. So if a child gets, "So somebody splashed water in my color," then they can fix that. So here I'm going to use what I want to do is have a center of yellow in this pink red form. And so I'm going to do the painting eraser here again. So I'm going to have a dry brush, dry and clean, and I'm just going to paint the shape that I want to take out. Now, as you can see, I'm just pushing the color around, but it's as if I'm softening it up a little. I'm gonna rinse and dry my brush again. And now I'm gonna vacuum all of that loosened pigment up. And it might take 3 or 4 tries. There's a hair. That out of there. Again, I just pick up a little paint and I dry it on the brush, on the rag. Dry the brush on the rag, and then I go back into it. If it's being stubborn, I might paint it a little bit with water, so I have a little bit more fluid there. Then I dry it, and then I can pick it all up. So I can get actually almost down to the white of the paper. There. So now I'm going to put gold on the inside here. Oop, my brush is falling apart. This hair out. There. Okay. So now I'm going to go into the yellow. My brush is clean and dry. I'm going to put it in the yellow. Now, again, if I put this all the way in, I'm going to get a full brush of yellow, but I only have this little space I want to fill. I don't need a full brush load of color. So I'm going to wipe my brush on the side. until I have very little color in it. I can always add more, but it's always good to start with a little bit and add more than have too much. Okay, so then you slowly paint, carefully fill that space with yellow. So would I have to say that most of the problems that the children are having where their paintings are flooding is that they haven't learned this technique of really being able to control their color, knowing what's in their brush, what their brush can hold, and modifying it. They can modify it in all different kinds of ways. So here in the yellow, I could either put it all the way in and wipe it off, or I could just dip it in the yellow just a little bit. And then I have only a little bit on the brush. You can see this nice line here where it shows how much yellow I have. But it might still be too much, so I would wipe it off. I might decide I only need a speck of yellow. So I'm going to dry the brush after it's been washed, and I'm only going to dip the corner into the paint and even wipe that still, so I have a very little bit of yellow in my brush, so I can do a very thin line around the outside without it flooding or bleeding into the other colors. Right? So that's really an exciting ability for them to be so refined in their application of color. So then, let's see, we can then take our blue, and I'm just making it up as we go along here. I can do blue like really full, and we can see what happens. So here it comes blue, is very full. I'm going to leave a little gap here between the blue and the yellow because I'm not yet ready to make it into green. And so I'll bring the full brush of blue around. It's very full. And then I'm going to get just a little bit more blue, not too much, about half a brush, wipe the edge. And then when I come into the yellow, I'm going to be really gentle so that I can bring just a little bit of blue to make it green. And I don't want to push it around too much, but very gently to come around to make it green. Keep going. Really gently, not a lot of blue in my paintbrush, just enough to turn that yellow into green. And not too much that it goes bumping into the pink. That would make it purple. I have a few bumps right here. There's a few, but not, I'm in control of that blue because I don't have too much on my brush. I'm gonna fill up the brush again with lots of dark blue and come closer to make that blue-green connection really strong. Okay, so here red surrounded by green. That's a really nice harmonious contrast. So let's see, what can we do next? The last one I'm going to do is I'm going to put a blue stripe and a purple stripe in my red form. Okay, so I'm going to wash my brush. My water has become very dark because of all the work that I've been doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the video and change my water, because if I'm doing painting eraser, I want to have clean water because I want to have a clean brush when I'm doing it. Okay, I'm back here now. I have a clean jar of water, and one of the things I also did was I got some fresh, dry, clean rags. So if you have a child who has a rag that they're trying to do painting eraser and it's so wet that you can wring water out of it, it's not going to be effective in drying their brush. So you want to give them a clean rag. So your basket of rags that you have in your classroom should always allow for those children who are extra watery and like to use it to dry and clean their brush. Some children won't ever use their rag because they have a real ability to control it before it gets in the brush to control the water. But some children will need lots of rags and make it possible for them to be successful with this activity. So here I'm thinking I'm going to have a blue stripe and a purple stripe. So the blue stripe, I will need to remove the red, and in the purple stripe I'll leave the red. So similarly to the way I did the yellow and the blue, I'm going to do the same in the red circle. So I'm washed my brush and I've dried it off now, and I'm going to go in and take away some of the red. And here I might not be lifting very much, but I'm giving myself an indication of where that stripe is going to be. Wash my brush. I try it again. And I go in it again. So you as a teacher will have your own brush, and when you go around helping children, especially learning this technique, you're going to use your own brush, not theirs, because you're going to do it and then they're going to do it after you so that they get practice, that you don't always do all the work. And you watch them and then you see what are they not doing correctly, what do they need to change, and then you make that suggestion and then they get to try it themselves. So here, through a process of drying and lifting, vacuuming it up, and drying and lifting, you're going to have a lot of control. Okay, so here I'm going to put my blue stripe in there, and I'm going to paint it a little bit wider. So as the same time I'm making a blue stripe, I'm going to have it paint the purple stripe as well. I don't want the blue to overwhelm the pink, so I'm going to use a little bit of blue on my brush. And how I'm going to do that, I'm going to just tip a little bit on, see here, a little bit just on the corner of the brush. So you can see it's just a little bit on the brush. I might even dab it here just to make sure it's just a little bit. So I'm going to come around the circle. And here, maybe just for control, I'll do the blue one first. And dip again, same corner. Dab it on my rag just to make sure I don't have it too much. And then I'm going to come around. To make the purple. Now I can see I have a little bit of a trouble blending the colors because the pink was the first color we put down and it has dried significantly since we started and is having a little trouble blending. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to then clean my brush. Dry it off. I'm going to go into the pink and I just need just an itsy bitsy bit just on the corner. You can see here just a little bit on the corner. And I'm actually not going to put that corner on the paper, but I'm going to put the other corner down. so that it flows a little bit through the brush. And then the bristles that didn't have paint can actually be used to help with the blending process. Yeah. There. That looks really good. Slow and steady. There's no rush. I've controlled the amount of paint I have on my brush, so I'm not really worried very much about flooding. That's really interesting. Okay. And then I see here, because I splashed a little on the side, you can see where I have this little blob of water. What I'm going to do is I'm going to dry my brush. I'm going to get a little tip of blue here. I'm going to fill that blue space, and then I'm going to just brush over it. Too much on my brush, so I'm just going to absorb some of it and then smooth it all out. There. So no drip now. Okay, how's that? Please feel free to put your questions and your comments in the section below, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Practice this yourself. Develop the language that you have to communicate these ideas with your students, and have fun. Enjoy the process. The better you get at it, then the more able you are to explain it to your class, and the students will feel empowered once they have these tools to really bring beautiful, complicated forms into their paintings. So, best of luck. Thanks for watching.